Forbes Books presents Leading What Matters Most, the podcast that helps you change behaviors, improve performance, and unlock the potential of your people. Here's Phil Geldart.
My guest today is Chris Tompkins. Hi Chris, great to have you.
Yeah, thanks Phil. Thanks for inviting me.
Chris is the CEO of Muskoka Woods, which is a premier Christian youth development organization up in Northern Ontario. And they are an amazing place. They are located on a gorgeous lake. He leads a large team of around 400 staff members that serves approximately 25,000 children annually. That's quite a handful, Chris.
Yeah.
So why don't you give us a little bit of insight around Muskoka Woods and what it means to be the CEO there and some of your responsibilities with folks? Kind of set the stage for us.
Yeah, well, it's very unique when you work with young people, and what we say often, and it's a unique word when you'll hear me say it, but when you deal with people's most prized possessions, I know children aren't possessions, but I think we get the idea here. When you deal with what matters to them most, there's a lot of things you have to take really serious. And so from an organization, when we talk about what we are and what we do, we want to provide an opportunity that inspires youth to shape their world. And so we want whatever they experience at summer camp or in our schools and groups program to last with them beyond the gates and the property at Muskoka Woods, and to go home and to start to shape their world. And so one of the benefits about taking kids away to camp or outdoor recreation experiences is they pick up so many things that they don't get in a normal environment. So being independent away from parents, trying new things, the social dynamics of relationships. We hire, as you mentioned, Phil, a lot of staff, about 350 in the summer, and over 120, about a third of them are international staff, and they come from all over the world. And so young guests as young as 6 and 7-year-old may have a counselor from Northern Ireland or New Zealand, and they may have kids in their cabin from Switzerland or Great Britain or Thailand even. And so the social dynamics are really unique. And then at the end of the day, we want kids to have fun. And so when you mix all that together, when you have a facility and a property and you're doing food service and you're doing risk management and you're doing marketing and sales, there's just a lot of stuff that goes into that. But everything that we do at Muskoka Woods is about kids and helping them thrive and investing in them in a period of time, whether it's a week or as they're on staff for 10 weeks, to really give them a taste of something that they might not get anywhere else. And then seeing how that goes back and impacts their lives and shapes them. And, you know, I know this is important for us, and I know it's with you. Camp really brings out leadership at the end of the day. And so a big thing of what we do is actually leadership development. Whether that's a 6-year-old or a 21-year-old that's, you know, running our ski program and managing lots of resource in the boats and programming and other staff. We think there's opportunities for people to learn how to influence others and develop in their core competencies and their character and who they are. So that's a lot to unpack about what we do and why we do it. But yeah, as far as what it means to be a CEO, it's trying to make sure all that happens well, and that we keep focused on our vision and our mission and ensuring we're making a difference in the next generation of young people.
Yeah, very cool. It's interesting. I look back onto my own career, and my early days as a leader was at a camp. And boy, I made a lot of mistakes. In those early days, you don't know anything, you know, and you learn and you grow. But I've often felt that being responsible for children at a camp has got to be one of the most rewarding, but also one of the most challenging things you can do as a leader.
Yeah, it is. And I think, Phil, given where we are in our culture and generation, one of the unique things in what we do is providing a safe place for kids to experiment, to, you know, healthily risk, you know, try new things and, you know, step out of their normal everyday home and comfort zone. And as leaders, even, you know, where appropriately, to learn how to fail and make mistakes in a safe environment. And we've seen that time and time again. But yeah, I think that's that unique thing about taking people away and a different environment. It allows you to provide opportunities that they just don't get in the regular ebb and flow of their lives.
So one of the things I was thinking about, Chris, just before we began is, you know, the title of the podcast is Leading What Matters Most. And I was thinking, there are few things in life that matter more than shaping the lives of youth, especially the youth that are going to go on to be leaders, whether they're leaders in the Christian ministry or in industry or whatever. So, and I know you guys did some work to do some research around actually what it is that this generation is looking for, what they want from their leaders. So it would be great if you would share that with us, just from the point of view of a lot of the folks listening to the podcast are going to be hiring the kinds of people that are coming out of your operation. And you are very representative of today's emerging workforce. So I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. We, in 2022, partnered with the University of Southern California and their business school, the Marshall School. It's called the Center for Effective Organizations. And we partnered with a lady named Jennifer Deal, who's an author. She teaches at UC San Diego, but also does work at USC as well. And we wanted to take a snapshot, as you said, Phil, particularly around Gen Z. So what we were looking at in that are our staff, 18 to 25-year-olds, and we wanted to take a look at their skills and attitudes, how that affects them as leaders, how that affects their continual development as a leader, what are the developmental needs of individuals as they enter into the workforce. And so those are kind of the broad research questions. And then, maybe some interesting highlights for us, Phil. And we've done a lot of research with young people. I spend a lot of time talking about youth and young people. And one of the things that's become really important to me, especially when you're talking about people, this could be true of anything, it's easy to kind of dissect a generation or a group of people, particularly through research, and talk about, here are all the things that we need to fix, or here are the concerns or the challenges. And so I think what shouldn't be lost when we start to talk about this group of people is, number one, groups of people are always made up with very unique individuals that have their own flavor and style and perspective. And so data kind of sometimes robs us of the uniqueness of that. But the other thing is that, and I learned this from a mentor, you can apply this to anything in life, Phil. You can talk about things like technology, but I think particularly with people in research, is applying this kind of lens to look at it. And what I learned from my mentor, Don Pastersky, who was a vice president at World Vision International and written a bunch of books on culture and Christianity in Canada, was this phrase of affirm the virtue, discern the vulnerability. And so I just think that's important. That's a great tool for any of our listeners who are in business and leadership. Is I think sometimes we can get in there and talk about all the vulnerabilities with this generation. I think it's pretty easy to spot some of them, and when we hear from the research, it'll draw out. But there is a ton of virtue with young people today. This group of young people are more connected to causes than ever before. They're more interested in doing work that really matters. When we take a look at working at summer camp, there's a lot of challenges. That you eat out of the kitchen, you live with people that you don't choose to live with. The pay is not great. And so when we talked about, and particularly when the researcher Jennifer was doing her focus groups, what she heard is these young people are here and they want to be involved with work that really matters. Connecting their actual physical work with things that make a difference in the world. I think that most of the people that are at summer camp are there because they want to invest in children and young people. And so as leaders, that was one thing that stood out to me, Phil, before I get into some of the other data that was unique about this generation. And so for me as a leader, how am I continuing to casting vision and reminding people the why behind what we're doing? And I know there's a ton of books and TED Talks and
I could not agree more. More and more, Chris, I am finding that the reason behind the work is what it is that's important. I remember many years ago, one of our facilitators was going to run a session, and it was in a factory operation, and he asked to have a tour of the factory. And there were a number of people working on the assembly line clicking two pieces of plastic together. I mean, that was all they did all day. And he asked the lady, "What are you doing?" And it turned out that the little pieces of plastic were shunts that went into a baby's heart. And she said, "I save babies." And it was a real eye-opener that organization had captured why it is that we do what we do. And I am seeing more and more that not just Gen Z, but the workforce wants to know, why are we doing what we're doing? What is the benefit, either socially, environmentally? It is a huge issue. And I think the pressure that you are seeing, and I know you're going to chat a little bit more, is only going to is going to aggravate it when they get into the workforce, or accelerate it, because they're going to bring that bias.
Yeah. And Phil, they get inspired by what matters and the meaning behind work, but it also will help them overcome some of the other pain points or pressures. At camp, I don't make a ton of money, right? And so that might be frustrating, but then when they're reminded of what it's about, they can navigate that and endure that because they're making a difference. And so they might be better positioned to be okay and understand some of the other inconveniences or uncomfortable things in the workforce that, any part of your job you don't love doing, right? There's some of the stuff that you just would rather not do. And I think when you're reminded about why it is you're doing what you're doing, those things become a little easier to swallow at the end of the day. But yeah, so we took a look at a deep dive into this, and we looked at our staff, about just shy of 150 of them. We did 16 interviews. We also took a look at university students in the US, about 600 of them, to kind of make some comparisons. And so here are a few things that this Gen Z really want and pay attention to. And so many of this might be really obvious for the leaders and other people that are listening, business people, anecdotally, but there's some data that can support this as well. The first thing is people are concerned about work-life balance. The young people that we surveyed strongly believe that people should have more leisure time and that work takes up too much of their time, which is, they might be young and university students, but they are worried that they won't have a decent life because of what's expected them at work. And they know they have to work. They need to, be employed to make a living and what they want to do, but they're concerned about how the expectations of them at work will impact. I thought that was really interesting, Phil, that they're worried about having a decent life because of what will be expected to them at work. Connected to that is around boundaries. They're concerned about being overworked. They're torn about whether they should be expected to do work that's not in their job description. They believe that sometimes people just have to get done what they need to get done, but they feel that employees should be paid for that type of work rather than doing it for free. And it's unique at camp, and as a Christian organization, there are some things that are connected to work that maybe if you're in marketing or mentoring other young people, that's one of our core leaves, our values at Muskoka Woods, is that we want to invest in other people and intentional growth. And so more than ever, these conversations, like, is this on my free time? Is this part of my work? And so I think those kind of conversations are coming up because there's this, and maybe connected to the earlier point about work-life balance, is this idea of, I don't want to be overworked and not adequately compensated for that.
It's interesting that on the one hand, they want to do work that matters, and on the other hand, they may not be that willing to step outside the normal boundaries. So how do you manage that as a leader, that sort of dichotomy?
Yeah, that's really the question at the end of the day. I think, and Phil, without diving into too much depth, we did another project years ago about what we do in the camp environment that brings out leadership skills. And one of the things that we talked about is this model with S's, and it's around C, stretch, and support. And it's the things that people experience that we can provide for them. And I think one of the ways to navigate these type of dichotomies or tensions in where they're saying, yeah, I want to do stuff that's meaningful, but I only want to work within this time frame and what's described, is to continue to have open conversations with young people and help them understand the why it is these things are necessary as part of the overall perspective. I think sometimes, and Phil, it connects to another thing around, and again, I'll go back to the research and then I'll circle back to this question. One of the other things that came out is around safety. This was a big word for Gen Zs, is wanting to feel safe at work. They believe that people should feel safe when they're at work. And what's interesting is they specifically described it in the negative, as in when something blank makes me feel unsafe. So it wasn't like an affirmative, like I can pick these things that I know when I feel safe. It's more around like when these type of things happen, I feel unsafe. And it is less to do with physical safety and more like psychological and emotional safety. I think that connects back to the overworked piece. They want to feel safe at work. Some of it can be very general, like, so when my boss is unkind, I feel unsafe. Some of it can be very specific about people or employees or whatever. And so that safety factors back into that. So when you go to that kind of C-stretch support model, like helping individuals be seen for who they are, what their strengths, their abilities, their unique personalities, coming up with individual growth plans for people, providing feedback, reward and recognition. These were all part of our S in C model. The stretch piece, and this is, Phil, where we get into how to have healthy conversations about what is required at work. Individuals have different levels of tolerance and stress. And I think sometimes younger people, even us as fully adults, have a hard time with this. We don't clearly understand or haven't really thought about stressors or, our tolerance for certain things. An example is, and I was guilty of this when I was young, my daughter who's 17 will say, I have so much to do and I'm never going to get it done today. And it creates this anxiety. And as a dad, I come alongside her and said, okay, honey, let's talk about what do you have to do? How much time do you think that will take you? And then all of a sudden, through an engaging conversation where I'm not just saying like, you need to stop, just get your homework done. You've got all day. I don't want to hear you complain about it. You should be able to sort it out. Is I help her unpack it. And then all of a sudden she goes, oh, that's really only about 2 hours of work. And you have 8 hours today to do it. And then the stress that she feels around this mountain that she hasn't really defined is starting to dissipate. So how do we have healthy conversations with the young people that work with us, the Gen Zs in our workforce, about what is expected, what is realistic, time management? And I know at Eagles Flight, there's a whole module on, managing your time, right? And so how do we help people? Because as we help them navigate what's required of them through these stretching conversations about what's required and how we're going to get there and what support and development they need, we can start to take this mountain down into realistic things. And then anxiety and back to the concerns of overwork, work-life balance, we might be able to knock that down from a mountain to a hill.
Let me just extrapolate a little bit. The illustration you give with your daughter, I think, is instructive, because if you're listening to the podcast, you're going, man, this new generation coming in is definitely not focused on my company. They're focused more on themselves and what's important to them and what they want and work-life balance, all those things. So how do I manage it? But I think one of the things that is vital for leaders to do is to not treat the workforce as a collective group, which is almost your comment as you began. You, as a leader, I have a series of individuals, and I need to meet with the individuals. I need to understand what's important to them, and at the same time, explain to them things which perhaps they don't see, that they don't understand. So the leader of this new workforce, I think, needs to be much more skilled at what we would call interpersonal conversations, the ability to respect, to empathize, and not compromise just because that's the way that person feels, but to guide them to perhaps a broader way of thinking about the universe and the job.
Yeah, and I would agree, Phil. I host a podcast for parents just on the world of young people today and how to help youth navigate the world. And the thing that comes up from a parenting perspective, Phil, which is exactly appropriate for us as leaders in the workforce and in business and whatever sector we're in, is it always comes back to listening to your kids and asking good questions. And like literally, if I could summarize all the parenting advice that I've heard the experts in the world share, it would come down to that. Because so often as parents, we want to come in, we've lived it before, and we want to, tell people what to do. And there is moments for coaching and guidance and setting boundaries or expectations on what should happen in the home. But so often when we put ourselves in a position of a learner to ask questions and to really, like you talked about empathy, to really try to understand what it is like to be a kid, because it's way different to be a kid today than it is when I was a kid. And it's easy for me to think that I know what's right for them. And yes, I'm an adult and I'm a parent. I do have a lot to offer to that conversation. But if I can start to ask questions, funny enough, some of the solutions start to emerge that you would have already said as you listen and you journey and you ask questions. So I think that's where you're bang on as leaders when we have, Gen Zs that work with us, is to really take the disposition of wanting to learn from them about how they view the world, what's going to make them more successful in their place of employment. And yes, there might be some things we need to impart and say, well, you know what, if you looked at it differently, or if you tried it this way, or if you actually just trusted me and did this, it would work out better. But we might also learn a lot more about who they are as individuals. Like I said, we're all motivated differently. We all have different levels of tolerance and stress, and understanding that on an individual basis helps us to create opportunities for people to grow into that. One of the things, Phil, when we've used, and it's from what you've done at Eagles Flight, is, and we might not have time to unpack the details of this, but is to have sandbox conversations with young people and employees. Like, the sandbox is defined by boundaries. They get to play and work within that, and for them to grow. And that's where the stretch piece comes for us, is to have individual conversations of what it looks like for them to grow in their job. Are they taking on more responsibility? Are they getting more training and development? And soon, over time, their sandbox starts to grow and they get more opportunities to play and to dream and to work within that sandbox. But as a leader, it's not a one sandbox fits all. And at different times in a young person's journey, there might be an opportunity to move one of those walls of the sandbox to make it bigger. But it's not set in stone. It's not the same for every entry level at every time. And so that's just a great model that we've used, even from Eagles Flight, to help have those specific conversations with young people about, back to that, like, they can get overwhelmed and say, well, I just need to make more money. How do I get there? Do I have to work harder? Is it just working hard? Well, no, there's actually different things that you can do. Sometimes it's about working smarter than harder. I think sometimes young people can think that it is just more work, but what if it's less work better, more effectively, more efficiently, right? And then you take that mountain down to a molehill for them, and then they're less anxious, they're less overwhelmed, and they can contribute in a unique way to what we're doing.
If you think of what a leader knows as the color red, and you think, okay, as a leader, I really need to get into the mind of this new workforce, and what are people thinking and how are they feeling? And you think of that as the color blue, you then think, okay, but wait a minute, am I managing from the red or am I managing from the blue? Because if I manage from the blue, all of a sudden, it's like I've completely abdicated my responsibility to lead. And I would say that in the same way that you mix red and blue and get purple, the great leaders are managing from purple. You're complementing what you know with what you get from them, but at the end of the day, you still have the responsibility to lead. But you're now leading from a much richer base because the two have come together. But it's not red or blue. And I think the temptation is, gosh, I should be blue now because this new workforce is coming in, or maybe I should just tell them what to do. But I think it's that blending which comes from the conversations, from the listening, and skills which leaders need to acquire to actually be able to hear the blue and make the purple.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, that sounds like the perfect place to stop. But coming up next time with Chris Tompkins, he talks about his focus on people development and the importance of leaders who see their people as a resource and not as a commodity.
If we can give them something to catch and taste that they take with them wherever they go, which is developing myself and investing in others is an important thing, then they will go make the world a better place, even if it's not being employed by us at the end of the day. And so we have a very high priority in our organization around people development.
This has been Leading What Matters Most with Phil Geldart. If you want to create a culture that drives performance and develop leaders that inspire and motivate, go to philgeldart.com. Leading What Matters Most is a production of Forbes Books.